Hello again, and thank you for staying with us. We continue here. Since entering the South African market, Shein in 2020 as well as Temu in 2024, these platforms have captured a combined 3.6% share of the CTFL market, generating 7.3 billion rand in sales in 2024 alone. But this success comes at a cost. A recent study by the Localization Support Fund is warning that over 34,000 local jobs in retail and manufacturing could be displaced by 2030. That's if current trends continue. Already, an estimated 8,000 jobs were lost between 2020 and 2024, with 960 million rand in local manufacturing sales wiped out. For more on this, let's bring in Proudly South Africa CEO Eustace Mashimbye, as well as Simon Eppel from the South African Textile Clothing and Textile Workers Union. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you both on the program. Worrying stats that we are seeing here. Eustace, I'll start with you. From a proudly South African perspective, how alarming are these job displacement numbers, especially for our local economy?
Good evening. They're very alarming, especially if you consider the fact that these are jobs that are, are displaced that we could have had in our economy. And when you look at the projections, it's about to get worse. Because they are taking a huge share of the market and in an economy that so desperately needs jobs. This is very alarming, and we are concerned, especially because it takes away manufacturing jobs and retail jobs in a very labor-intensive sector that was ailing, before the master plan came about. And with the retail, clothing, textile, footwear, leather master plan having ambitious targets to grow local manufacturing, it looks like this is going to set us on a back foot. So we are very concerned.
Simon, this will set us on a back foot, according to Eustace. You've called Shein and Temu's model smash and grab economics. Can you unpack what you mean by that for our viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say it's a pleasure to be able to talk to yourself and your listeners. Smash and grab is a term that we recognize very much in the country. It's a homegrown concept. We use it all day, but it's being used by other people against us. And really the idea here is that these foreign businesses, these offshore online retailers are conducting business in the country at all cost to us and none to them. And so they managed to price down exceptionally far down through various mechanisms. Some of it is around efficiency, some of it around is smart networking of their businesses between supplier and the retailer, but some of it just appears to be predatory behavior, predatory pricing in the market, use of both factories that conduct human rights abuses, labor rights abuses, etc. And what they do then is they flood into the country product that so vastly undercut our market, they both cause job losses and downward pressure on our own market. So we begin to have more informalized manufacturing and jobs here. So that's smash and grab economics. All cost to us, none to them. Of course, we want the opposite. We need the kind of development, the kind of reciprocal trade, the kind of benefit where we can grow the number of people with jobs in the country, not outsource them to another country, where we can increase the wages of people so we've got more purchasing power, and we have a dynamic upward spiral rather than walk off the edge of a cliff.
Eustace, part of the issue seems to be that these companies gained market share incredibly fast when you look at their stats. But how has that speed indeed affected the ability of local retailers and manufacturers to respond to the situation?
I mean, when you consider that these platforms within the last 4 years were able to gain the kind of market share that traditional retailers who developed online platforms and global retailers as well as domestic retailers took about 13 years, some of them, to achieve. It points to the fact that there is something that they're doing, which is predatory, to borrow from Simon, and really is concerning to all of us, because if you think about the efforts that have been made, at a policy level, at a practical level, in conjunction with the retailers, all social partners were party to the master plan, and I'll keep referring to it because that was a grand plan to get this industry back to where it needs to be. And so I think there is a need now for other interventions to be put in place to ensure that we can halt the progress of these platforms, because at the rate they are growing, like I said earlier, we're in trouble if we don't come up with strong policy interventions. And some of those things are practical things that can be done, but it will need, political will. It will need, collective taking of responsibility in the same way that all parties took responsibility and agreed on a master plan, which is a grand plan. And so that's what we need here.
Right. Simon, the report also highlights tax loopholes and customs challenges as well. Even though SARS has moved to close some of these gaps, do you believe enough is being done to level the playing field, if you will?
The short answer, Nhlanhla, is no. So the first step to try to balance the playing field was, in fact, to levy the VAT and close the import loopholes. And that's being done. It's not done altogether satisfactorily, but the progress is there and it's being made. But of course, even with that, the other kind of downward pressure, predatory pricing mechanism still exist. And so the playing field is not level. It's not clear that we're even on the playing field with them. I think they're attempting to push us off the playing field. So we need more that needs to be done. I just want to say something quickly, which is this is not just a clothing, textile, footwear, and leather problem. Some of these platforms already, and increasingly you'll see it over time, ship and sell other goods. So in fact, this affects the entire economy, whether it's stationery, paper, furniture, automotive spares, tools. You can pick your product and that's going to be on here. So any South African worker or any South African business that produces goods in those lines, well, you're in the targets, you're in the crosshairs, and you're going to get hit. But there are lots of things we can do, and there are lots of things we should be doing. The tax loopholes, fixing them is the first step, but there's a lot more steps we need to take.
Eustace, on the other hand, some argue that these platforms are simply meeting consumer demand for cheaper goods. But how do we balance affordability for consumers with the need to protect the local industry here?
I mean, I hear the argument quite a lot about the fact that these products are cheap, but are they really cheap? How soon do you have to replace them? I'll borrow from the Afrikaners who say, goedkoop is duurkoop, which means it's cheap when you buy it, but because you have to replace it so soon, it becomes expensive because of how often you have to replace the same item. But even with that said, you can't put a price on the fact that a lot of our people remain unemployed. That people talk about the triple challenges, but at the heart of all of those problems is unemployment. Once you deal with unemployment, you'll start dealing with the other two challenges that we are spoken about so often. And so, I think we have to prioritize. It's not only about what those products. The products that those platforms are getting into the country by way of us buying from them, but it's also a bread and butter issue. If people have jobs, they'll be able to then fend for themselves, and then it lessens the burden on other sectors of society that desperately also, need people to be able to afford, like healthcare and education and all of those things, and the tax base as well. I mean, how much of that money that are spent on those platforms has come to our country? Zero. So all of that money has left the country. We've lost an opportunity to gain much needed tax revenue in the form of manufacturers and retailers who would have had increased revenue, and so would have had to pay additional taxes. There would have been 8,000 jobs that have been displaced. Those are 8,000 taxpayers that would have gained in the tax system. And so the challenges can be compared with the fact that the products are perceived to be cheap and reasonable.
Simon, let's piggyback on that. The research does suggest the potential for about 35 jobs to be lost by the end of the decade if nothing changes. How realistic is that projection from where you sit?
Nhlanhla, it's conservative as far as we sit. So the 35,000 jobs. Look, I mean, that would be a bad case in clothing, textiles, footwear, and leather. But certainly we see the signs of it already. But the reason why I call it conservative is when you start aggregating all the other sectors into it, then the problem just multiplies. Of course, once you start stripping workers of jobs, you strip consumers of income. And you just enhance the need for them to buy cheaper and cheaper goods. So it's a downward spiral. into a situation which is really untenable. It ends in social disease, it ends in social distress, it ends in greater inequality, greater social instability. It's not a good model. It's but I would reckon, that the 35,000 is conservative if you consider the entire economy. One of the things that can happen is, I'll use an analogy here. You can be a factory that dumps your waste in the river and your balance sheet looks better because you think, your costs look better. But downstream, the clinic downstream is going to see an increase in people needing care. You just shift the cost. So when you cut costs somewhere like this, you just shift the cost somewhere else. We're externalizing costs into the greater society. We're externalizing and raising the costs and challenges to the detriment of poor people. And that's really not a smart way to do economic development.
Yeah. Eustace, what lessons can South Africa then take from how other countries have managed similar e-commerce disruption?
Look, I think the biggest lesson for me that we can borrow from our peers is the fact that some of these countries have now started imposing localization conditions on them. So you have to impose some sort of localization condition across the whole value chain, whether it's them manufacturing some of those products that they're going to sell on their platforms, within the country, looking at issues like logistics and some of those, services that are part of the multiply effect. If you think of how much they're taking out of the economy, because we're talking about 8,000 direct jobs in manufacturing and retail. But if you think of the entire value chain in terms of the other industries that would have benefited if those transactions had happened to the benefit of South African products. So I think that's one of the things that we should definitely start looking at. There is also talk of setting up intergovernment agencies. I mean, that's a recommendation that comes out of the study to get players like SARS, who take care of customs, ITech, to look at what it is that can be done in terms of duties, the Competition Commission, and some of these agencies that can potentially look at what other countries have done, and we start looking at imposing some of those, suggestions that are in the report. But I think the biggest one for me is imposing localization conditions. Some of those products have to be made here because they are benefiting from the South African economy.
Gentlemen, let's leave it here. Thank you so much for your time. That was Eustace Mashimbye from Proudly South Africa and Simon Eppel from SACTWU, helping us unpack the far-reaching effects of Shein as well as Temu's rapid rise, especially in South Africa's retail space. The numbers may be daunting when you look at them, but as we've heard tonight, there are strategies and choices that can help protect local jobs.